Hi, everybody. I think we're ready to get started. So everybody knows this is a discussion about NAFTA, not so much about what it is and what it has been, but where it's going, where we're moving in the future. So you see on my left, your right, Stéphane Lessard, Consul General for Canada. On my right, your left, Berenice Rendón, Consul General for Mexico. If you don't know who these folks are, you should really be ashamed of yourself and come out from under that rock you've been living in for the last couple of years. So we're going to get started about NAFTA. When we kicked this off, guys, we discussed, laying out for the group what the benefits of NAFTA are for the US, for Mexico, for Canada. Given our time constraints, where we are, who the audience probably is, I don't think we have to sell anybody on NAFTA, what it is, why it's important. This is a pretty informed group. So instead, if anybody's got questions about NAFTA, we're going to leave some time at the end where you can ask those questions. But for now, I think we'll start with what can be improved in NAFTA. We're in the middle of renegotiations now. What are the areas where the parties are focusing on? Where do you see the most improvement? Berenice, we'll start with you. I think you've got a mic.
Yes,
right
sorry. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would say that NAFTA has set a set of rules and procedures that we have been following for the last 20 or so years. And that's one of the areas that might be improving. That is actually, I think, the focus of all the renegotiation. We are trying to modernize NAFTA to make it a more efficient process, but of course to bring also new issues, new matters, technology, the e-commerce, energy sector, they were not in the negotiations 25 years ago. First of all, because Mexico was not as open, for instance, in telecommunications and energy. And so far, or right now, in this administration, we have been through a set of structural reforms on the energy, telecommunications, e-commerce, that we are trying to get into NAFTA. That's one of the issues. But in general, is to modernize our agreement and make it more efficient and with benefits for the three countries.
Excellent. Thank you. Stéphane?
Yeah, thank you for being here. I think that the thing that strikes me the most about NAFTA is how much our prosperity in each of our countries is dependent on continued free trade, and how much prosperity has been created because largely of NAFTA. So just in Colorado, 141,000 jobs depend on trade and investment with Canada, and many more with Mexico. So just to bring home the point that over the last 24 years, we've built a powerhouse economic engine that in many ways can outcompete the rest of the world. And now, as we are engaged in the renegotiation of NAFTA, which is fair, after 24 years, you want to improve an agreement, to modernize it, as Berenice said. We have some objectives in Canada. We were ready on day one of these negotiations, and we're still, as Mexico is and American negotiators, we're at this 24/7 these days. It's crunch time, and our objectives include some of the ones that Berenice mentioned, digital trade and energy possibly being included in NAFTA. But we have some other objectives, including promoting more movement of experts and professionals across the borders, so we can, in fact, enable our companies to bring in the right talent at the right time. We're looking to open up some of this, open up some of the government procurement opportunities between us, so we can make sure we have the biggest possible pool of bidders to create the most value for our citizens when we have government procurement. We have, other ideas regarding dispute settlement, making sure we keep those provisions in place. The general idea is to build on the successes of the past and take it into the 21st century. I should say, in closing, we have other objectives around gender and indigenous rights, gender equality and indigenous rights, to make sure that more women and more of our indigenous people can participate in the economy and in trade.
Excellent, thank you. So building on that, everybody has pieces of NAFTA that they would like to see improved. I mean, it was agreement that was reached something like 25 years ago. I don't know what you all were doing 25 years ago, but I was a different person then than I am now. The world has changed a great deal between then and now. In the US, our administration has been very vocal about the problems associated with NAFTA, or at least what they see as the problems associated with NAFTA. President Trump ran on an anti-NAFTA platform, called it a terrible deal, worst trade agreement ever, all kinds of things. Now, this administration has tried to move a few measures forward, seemingly unilaterally, to sort of advance what it wants in NAFTA, things like steel and aluminum tariffs, increasing Buy American provisions within NAFTA. So I'd like to get your perspective on what these measures tend to do for NAFTA. Will they achieve their objectives? How do we move things forward positively given some of these suggestions from the U.S. side? Stéphane?
Thank you for the question. I think the short version of this is protectionist measures like Buy America provisions, like country of origin labeling on cattle, like duties or tariffs. They often come from a good place. They often come from a concern about protecting jobs, and our government is very interested in protecting and expanding Canadian jobs, and I'm sure it's the same in all countries. So we understand that, but the problem is, and this is supported by data and long experience, when you implement those measures, you start scratching the surface and you end up with negative unintended consequences. So Buy America, for example, or let's call it Buy Canada, just to be clear and fair. So Buy Canada, if we did that, if Ontario does that, or Canada as a whole, what it does is it restricts the pool of suppliers on steel or whatever, and what it does is it jacks up the price because there may not be suppliers in Canada that can do that, so you have to create capacity, issues like that. And the pool of suppliers is smaller, so the price will increase and our tax dollars will not go as far. That's just one example. And so they're intended to protect jobs, but they end up costing jobs. The steel tariffs under the Bush #2 administration ended up costing a lot more jobs in downstream industries than they protected in the steel manufacturing industry. And the same will occur again unless we find a solution.
Yes, thank you. And I think NAFTA, what has done in the more than 20 years, has created jobs. It's not that NAFTA is against jobs. For instance, in the case of Mexico, the Mexican economy has been modernized because of NAFTA, because we have to be more competitive. Our three countries have to be more competitive. You mentioned that the world is not the same. We have China. We were discussing that in the inauguration opening conference. We had the European Union that used to be only 15 countries, now is 27, 28. And NAFTA has evolved into a very integrated trade space. We have 5 million jobs, depending on it, only in the United States. As Stéphane mentions, if we get away with NAFTA, get out of NAFTA, either the US, Mexico, or Canada, because we don't like how the negotiation will end up, those jobs are going to be affected. Let's talk about the auto industry, the automobile industry. We have, in the three countries, a very integrated supply chain, as it has mentioned here. But if we put tariffs or quotas or any protectionist measure, then prices are going to go up. And who is going to pay for this? More expensive cars? The consumers. And the agricultural sector, we have rural communities depending on NAFTA because we all import and have a very successful agriculture business right now. So the rural communities around the exports of products to Mexico, wheat, corn, and other grains, are going to be affected not only because they will lose jobs, but everything will be more expensive. Your breakfast table and your lunch or your dinner table will be more expensive because of tariffs or quotas or any other protectionist measure.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've got, what, 2 days left before the self-imposed deadline about renegotiating NAFTA. So for those of you who aren't familiar, a couple years ago, Congress granted the president trade promotion authority. That runs out here in a couple of days. And so my understanding is that the Speaker of the House would like NAFTA renegotiations to be completed before he would have to reauthorize trade promotion authority for the White House. That's the day after tomorrow that it runs out. So I think the chances are somewhere between slim and none that NAFTA gets fully renegotiated, finalized between today and Thursday. What are the consequences of a withdrawal from NAFTA? What happens if NAFTA goes away? I don't actually think that's a possibility on Friday morning, but it could conceivably be a possibility 6 months from now. What happens if that's the case? What happens if the U.S. withdraws from NAFTA, or the U.S. and Mexico, or it just falls apart? Berenice?
Yes. Well, first of all, that's like a political time limit. And our negotiations are not constrained by that. Our Secretary of Economy just said last night and this morning that negotiations are going to be permanent. They are not going to stop. That's only a requirement for the US Congress. It doesn't have to do anything with Canada or Mexico. We have our own political calendars also. We have elections in Mexico this year, July 1st. You have provincial elections. The US has intermediate elections. So what the technical negotiations are trying to do, the negotiators, is to continue permanently. They are discussing. There's a lot of things to discuss, to negotiate, because of course it's a very complicated process. It's been only 9 months, the renegotiation or the modernization. So what Mexico is saying right now, we don't see it finishing in 2 days or in 1 month, let's say, because even if the Trump administration wants to get out of NAFTA, there's a process of 6 months at least, and it has to go to Congress, etc. So what Mexico is saying is we are favoring a quality aspect of the free trade agreement, not the time limit or any other constraints.
A very similar position. From day one on these renegotiations, Canada's position was the deal that we end up with has to be better than the current deal, and it has to be win-win-win. So it has to be win for the other parties, it has to be win for Canada. Why would Canada sign on, or Mexico, or anyone, sign on to a deal? Why would your company sign on to a contract if it doesn't make business sense for you? So we're hard at this, 24/7, the negotiators are working very hard, and we are confident that eventually we will have a good deal. But if the unthinkable happens, which is the question, if we have a situation where I would expect the American administration, because I don't expect Canada to walk away from the table. We have said we would not, and I believe perhaps Mexico has a similar position. So if the American administration were to walk away from NAFTA and trigger the withdrawal, that would set in motion a chain of events which could eventually lead to actual withdrawal from NAFTA. In the case of Canada, there is a precursor Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, which automatically would kick in, likely. However, maybe American administration doesn't want that either and withdraw. So legally then, you have most favored nation tariffs under the World Trade Organization kicking in. This is what I think, Berenice, you were saying. So tariffs that were eliminated with NAFTA would kick back in, and American cattle producers or meat products or agricultural producers, for example, could face tariffs of up to 25% exporting meat products into Canada. That's just one example of one sector that is very integrated. It would likely price your producers out of the Canadian market, which is important. Likely similar things with Mexico, which is even more important for your producers. And it would disrupt the supply chains that our businesses have created. So it would make us less competitive. And I'll just say this. There are many people outside North America, many countries that are rooting for the demise of NAFTA. Because why? Because we have become the most competitive economic powerhouse anywhere. And we, with 7% of the world population, we have 28% of global GDP. What do you think China is going to be unhappy or happy with the demise of NAFTA making our people less competitive or other competitors?
Absolutely. And I'll just add very quickly that in my own law practice, I've seen the impact of just the uncertainty about the future of NAFTA. I've seen investments in the United States fall apart because the supply chain is linked in with NAFTA, and the uncertainty about NAFTA has caused investors not to build projects in Colorado that would have given Colorado jobs because of NAFTA is still here, but the uncertainty about NAFTA's future has already made some capital flee. With that, we'd like to open it up for questions, but I want to inform you before we do that I have a bias. And my bias in recognizing questioners is that the closer you are to the front of the room, the more likely you are to be recognized, just so that everyone knows. So the next time you see me in front of you, you'll know to sit in the front of the room rather than the back. All right, so any questions for our speakers here this morning? No? Everybody's good on NAFTA? You agree with everything that we said?
Of course.
It's all right? Please.
The parallels, what parallels would you see with Brexit? And is there anything happening in Brexit that you fear might happen if NAFTA dissolved?
Well, I think it's completely different. The European Union has been that unified body taking policies for the whole union, for all the members. And as far as I know, I'm not, I don't have all the information, that's a whole country going out of the set of rules and regulations that the European Union has now. In our case, we are an integrated trade space, but we are not as integrated as the European Union in policies, other kind of policies. So I don't think you can compare it because I think it's too different. The common denominator, I would say, is anti-globalism, anti-free trade, and anti-globalism in general, but the forces are still there for globalization.
No, I would have said exactly the same. I think that's the answer.
Okay. Others?
Oh, come on.
Be brave. Come on. All right, we've got one over here in the corner.
If NAFTA is not renegotiated by July 1st, July when the Mexican elections take place, how do you think the election of AMLO, let's say, would affect the negotiations?
Well, that will depend on who wins the election and what its platform towards NAFTA is. But I would say that in general, there is a unified position in Mexico that we have to keep NAFTA in place because it has been good for the economy, for the modernization of the economy. Maybe a candidate has a different position in certain things or the other ones, but I would say that it's a general understanding that NAFTA should be kept in place because it will disrupt production chains and all that we have been talking about here.
What do you all know about the proposed changes on energy and on technology among the discussions, the negotiators? Can you tell us anything?
Maybe I can start with energy, but I think it has a lot to do with Mexico. But I know that the negotiators are working hard to possibly include an energy chapter in NAFTA, as opposed to side letters that were possibly present in the current NAFTA. And I believe a lot of that has to do with Mexico's incredible opportunities and recent reforms, Berenice, that maybe you want to mention.
Yeah, exactly. We have gone through structural reforms in this administration, and one of the main results has been the energy sector that has been open to private investments, and it has been very successful. The rounds of bidding that have taken place so far. So there's discussions on taking the energy aspects of Mexico modernization into the negotiations. Those are very technical issues. We don't have the whole information. Negotiators are keeping a strategy, all the information to themselves. But in general, it's part of the modernization of NAFTA is to take into consideration new sectors, energy, e-commerce, the technology change that is part of the cause of losing jobs. Not NAFTA is the technological part. So all that's it's into the negotiations just to introduce new fields into NAFTA.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add quickly, when you look at the map of North America, you see enormous trade between the nations in energy. You know, Canada is a big supplier. In fact, the biggest supplier of energy of any type to America. Hydro in the east, crude oil in the west, the center in the west. Mexico, natural gas moves crude oil as well. So we're essentially our two countries, like batteries feeding our economies, but also the mighty American economy. And it has a lot to do with energy independence for North America. And I think there's huge potential there.
No, you're absolutely right. So there's something that's happening up here that you all can't see, and that is that there's a clock right down here, and it's blinking red at us because our time for the session has run out. But so that makes me very nervous to have a red light blinking at me, so I want to make it stop as quickly as possible. So I'll just turn to our guests here and say anything else for the audience to sort of close up, tie a bow on what we've said up here today?
Well, I would say that NAFTA has created a whole space not only for trade. We have security issues. We have energy independence as a region. We have become a very integrated economies, the three countries, and the negotiations are just that, to keep advancing on those issues, to modernize trade, and of course, we were talking earlier about the impact of NAFTA on immigration. Mexican immigration has been lowering more and more, even before Mr. Trump arriving to the U.S. government, because NAFTA has enabled Mexico to create more jobs, so less people are migrating to the United States. It's other nationalities. I'm not saying that Mexicans are not migrating to the United States, but because they migrate because there are jobs here, and you see it in the East industry. So it's not only trade, it's also labor markets, investments, energy, many other issues that have come up in the last years.
Quickly, we built this continent together. We defend it together. We just celebrated the 60th anniversary of NORAD a few days ago. And the opportunities are enormous if we stay together and understand our shared prosperity is we're tied to one another in maintaining that. I think the opportunities are enormous. We're optimistic. NAFTA has brought Canada and Mexico much closer together. There's more trade and more contacts at all levels. In respect to America, we are the best of friends, partners, and allies. And really, we have so much in common, north-south culturally. I mean, it's incredible. So I think this is going to work. Are there going to be continued ups and downs? I expect it. But too much is at stake. We're going to make this work.
Awesome, thank you. So please join me in a warm thank you for the consuls from Colorado's 2 largest trading partners.
Very good. Thank you.